Hi, my name is Jane Scarf, and I'm coming to you from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. And I want to talk to you today about fighting fear with faith, and specifically fear of communism with faith in God. And this is really important because the method that's being used to invade our country is fear, our fear. And they're not, it's not an armed invasion. It's they're infiltrating, and they're creating scenarios to scare you, and then it's the fear itself that allows them to move forward and capture. So the methodology is to overstep your rights and make you think you have nothing to say or do about it, and then for them to keep moving forward when they've got us to the point where we think, well, we're beat, we're there's nothing we can do. But it's important to look past these psyops that they're creating. They're staged. Adamson Barbecue, for example. When I saw that, I was horrified and terrified, with police grossly overstepping our rights, going in with horses and arresting him physically and dragging him out with cuffs behind his back, and people were all freaking around him, and then learning that the public health had taken possession of his property, which is like, what? And use the Trespass Property Act and the Criminal Code to maintain their possession of his property. Like, I was like, whoa, okay, like, this is really bad. And I thought it was the police. And then later, I learned that these officers were not sent by the Toronto Police Services. They were hired by Mayor John Tory and sent there to do that. And in fact, the Toronto Police, had they chosen to, could have used the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act and the Reopening Act to actually have gone in there and shut the place down, because they're allowed under that legislation to shut down a gathering, but they didn't do it. That's really encouraging and really exciting when I recognize, wait a minute, it wasn't Toronto, it was the Tory and his hired goons. And then same thing with Dundas Square, all those arrests, those vicious arrests, and the whole arrest intimidation stuff that went on at Queen's Park on subsequent weeks. All psyops, not legal, not supported by the police force itself, not initiated by the police force itself. And to me, that's evidence that our police, Toronto police, are not captured. And I had an experience here on the 14th of February when there was a protest planned for Parliament Hill during gray zone, during stay-at-home orders. I called the police and said that I wanted to set up a booth in front of Parliament Hill on that day and protest. And I asked, what's going to happen? And they said, well, you have to get a permit from the city. And I said, well, what's going to happen if I don't get a permit from the city? And it was a woman officer I talked to. She came back and she said, well, as long as you don't go on the road and as long as you're peaceful, we're not going to bother you, and we're not even going to reduce your numbers. So that's at the same time that Toronto was smashing and bashing people and arresting them very aggressively and cruelly. Ottawa's going, no, we're not going to do that. So another sign that our police are not captured. They're infiltrated and there's pressure on them and all of that, but they're not captured. Now, what they're trying to do is they're trying to use the charter to pressure the police to do these emergency measures, because Section 1 of the charter, our communist-friendly charter, allows the government to override your rights if they think they have a good enough reason. which is completely ridiculous because the whole idea of having those rights in the first place is to keep government in its place, to keep the government from overstepping. And why would we want a section 1 that gives the hand, or that gives the fox the control of managing the hen house? Like, it's not good. It's like trying to take a trip in a boat with a hole in it. This is a slippery slope, because what happens is, if we use the charter, and don't worry, I have some good news, because this isn't what we have to deal with in total for our rights. In section 1, when they override, if the police are just regarding the charter and nothing else, then they have to do whatever it says in these emergency measures, because it's only the court that can decide under section 1 if the government had a good enough reason to override them. So once they bring in this emergency stuff, they're allowed to enforce it, if you're just using the charter, until a court decides. And then that's a big fiasco, because, constitutional challenge is very costly, complicated, time consuming, and it's only maybe the court is going to decide that you have rights in the end. So, or decide if the government had a good enough reason to override these rights. And that's not even the end of it either, because Rocco Galati says that he believes that the government cannot meet the conditions of section 1 to override your rights. But on the other hand, Clayton Ruby, also a high profile constitutional lawyer with many years under his belt, he says they can. So for us, it's maybe the court's going to agree that the government had enough reason to override our rights, and maybe they're not. But the worst thing is that even if we win and they say, oh no, there wasn't a good enough reason, it wasn't a real pandemic, blah, 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 let's, derail this legislation, pronounce it unlawful, and it looks like a win. But it's not, because section 1 is still there. So the next day they can say, now we have a new variant, and it's worse and it's stronger. So we're putting emergency measures out again, start the whole damn thing again. So it's a quagmire. It's not a good way to assert your rights. And when you assert those with the police, you're basically saying, do it to me, right? So I'm saying, don't go there. Instead, we have our Canadian Bill of Rights, which was enacted in 1960 specifically to keep communism out of this country. And there's no override. It's an obligation that's on the government only, not on us, only on the government, to respect our rights. So and what they have to do in here is recognize that we have these rights. They're not giving us these rights. We already have them. But this document says that they're recognizing that we have these rights, and they're committing to respecting them. So it doesn't get better than that in terms of legislation to defend the public, and to defend democracy and so on. But we have to know them, and we have to assert them, and insert them instead of the Bill of Rights, instead of the Charter of Rights. And in this document, they're not allowed to override. And there's a quote in the fancy version. The Prime Minister who initiated this bill made a quote, and it says, "I am Canadian, a free Canadian, free to speak without fear, free to worship God in my own way, free to stand for what I think right, free to oppose what I believe wrong, free to choose those who shall govern my country. This heritage of freedom I pledge to uphold for myself and all mankind." So that's the intention of this, is to uphold your freedom and the integrity of the people and the country. So we have to, you know, bring it back ourselves. Like the government's, kind of shoving it off to the side. They try to invalidate it completely. But if you look at the Emergency Act 1918, right in the preamble, it says that the government, when they're making their emergency planning, they have to respect the Charter of Rights, the Canadian Bill of Rights, and the international covenants on rights, even in the case of a national emergency. So that's 1988. So the Charter came through in 1982. So 6 years later, Canadian Bill of Rights is still active. Plus, it's been used in court many, many times between 82 and now. So it's still an active piece of legislation. Another criticism of it is that, oh, well, it's just for the federal government, so this doesn't apply to any of the COVID stuff. But in fact, it does apply because the federal government regulates police, all police, and they also regulate the municipal bylaw officers. So our rights have to be respected at all times by police and municipal bylaw officers. And the beauty of this is that it's in the moment. Okay, and it doesn't obligate us, right? So it doesn't mean that we have to recognize the jurisdiction of the system or to pay tax or anything. No obligation on us, zero. But obligation on the government at all times to respect this. It's the federal government. So this would obligate police to respect these rights because police are federally regulated. And that's real, and municipal bylaw officers are also federally regulated. So we can use this to maintain our protection because, like, for example, closing the gathering, Adamson Barbecue, they cannot, with the Bill of Rights, they cannot enter a premise without a criminal warrant. That's the only time that our system allows entry by police or by, well, they don't even allow it by law officers anyway, but by police. Police can enter. And our warrant system is well developed, and it's not perfect. And I mean, if people have complaints about it, I'm sure they do, because the system has a lot of lumps in it. But in essence, it's a really good process, and most of the time it works quite well. If someone is going to be charged with something, the officer has to go to a justice of the peace and fill out a document and swear that they have certain evidence against this person. So they would say witnesses or DNA or whatever. And then the JP has to decide if there's enough evidence for a conviction. And if he does, then he issues the warrant, and then they can enter. Okay, well, that, like, the next door neighbor saying, well, I saw 7 people go in there not instead of 5. I don't think so. Not a crime, for one thing, and not evidence for another thing, not going in front of a JP. So it's like completely unlawful to do that if they do that, even though this legislation, this COVID legislation, does say that they can do that. And the same with asking for ID. This emergency measures stuff says that the bylaw and the police can ask you for ID when you're just walking up the road, not doing anything. No, they cannot. They have to have, like with the criminal code, because the criminal code is in concert with the Canadian Bill of Rights, and the procedure for IDing somebody, there has to be reasonable and probable cause that that person committed a crime, and then they can require you to ID yourself, and only then. Not reasonable probable cause that you broke a bylaw. That's not allowed. So we do have a pretty good framework, and understanding that, I think, is very empowering. And then you have to find out ways to assert yourself with these rights. And I do have one recommendation. I'm going to put it in the credits. It's a notice, a trespass notice that you can put on your home and on your business and on your church that outlines your rights here. It basically says no trespassing without a criminal warrant. And also, I should point out that any unlawful entry because it would be unlawful. Without a warrant, it would be unlawful. So any unlawful entry in your home or your business or your church, you can defend yourself. The Criminal Code Section 34 allows you to protect yourself. So the last thing I wanted to discuss is a method of dealing with the fear that these psyops create, like when you're watching Adamson Barbecue or The Arrest at Dundas or any number of other psyops that they've performed across the country. What you can do if they've gripped you with that fear, or even when you're hearing all the stuff about the vaccine injuries and hearing the horrific plan that they have going forward, like these globalists, like they want to eliminate 90% of the population, and what is that? Just the altering your DNA and mind control, all that stuff. Like that is pretty scary stuff, and I don't doubt that that's exactly what they're wanting to do and trying to do. However, there is a way to counteract the fear that initiates or that creates, and that is to when you grip with that fear, like what you're trying to do is trying to figure out a way to stop it or run and hide from it, and you're just like you're panicking and you're not focused and you're not executing effectively. So what you want to do is put that aside, like just stop trying to control it, stop trying to run away from it, just push it aside for the time being and focus instead on the reasons that you have to believe in God, like the things that have happened in your life that have caused you to have a belief in God. And also think about why you got involved, why you're a freedom fighter. What are the reasons for that? For example, myself, I want to maintain a level of freedom and peace in our country for my children now and for the future generations. Like I have a strong, feeling and even need to involve myself to try and make that happen. So what happens is the two things together, like when you go through the mental process of remembering why you believe in God, and then the process of remembering why are you doing this? Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to stop communism from coming in? Those two together just dissipate the fear. The fear just magically, or not, I don't know, spiritually or something, just gone. And it's miraculous, really. And there's more to it than that too, because soon as you get into that frame of mind, then you're more effective. Then you can say, okay, maybe I can't stop everything, but I can take a little piece of the project or piece of the task and do it. And so when you start to move forward like that, it resonates. Other people see you, hear you, join you. Then there's a sharing of resources, a sharing of ideas, and that increases your strength. It increases your voice. It increases your effectiveness. And then the communists don't have a chance. Like we can beat their ass like this. It's much more powerful than they're doing. They're going around smashing and bashing like bullies, trying to scare us, and we're tapping into that internal strength and saying, "Hey, buddy, we're not scared. We're not losing this country. We're not laying down. We don't believe you. We don't believe that you've got this in the bag. You do not. There's all kinds of evidence that you're losing it. And the police are not captured, and the military are not captured, and not all our officials are captured. A lot of them are, unfortunately, and our institutions are not behaving very well. The education system, the health system, the public health system are all lockstepping, against us. But that is a small percentage of the total. And we have an army and we have police for the specific purpose of protecting our rights. And that's protecting us from invasion from others and protecting us from the government intruding and overstepping. So, and I believe that the majority of the police are right now protecting our rights and refusing, because if not, it would look very different here now. It wouldn't just be a psyop here and a psyop there. Like whoosh, everything would be in our face. So we haven't lost, not even close. And I don't want anybody to believe that we have lost and that we can't do anything and that all the police are corrupted and captured and all the military. They are not. And I can show you with the Adamson, with this COVID measures, Toronto police could have gone in there and shut that place down for as long as they felt necessary. Okay. But they didn't. Instead, public health hired off-duty police officers to go in there and do that. And public health took over the property. But public health shut it down. Public health put all those police there. Public health had Adam arrested. That's not Toronto police. And that's not legal, what they did. It's not even legal under the emergency measures because they're not police. The public health had no right to go in, and they went in. Only the police have the right to go in under there, but under the Canadian Bill of Rights, they don't, because it's not a criminal activity that's going on. So Toronto Police behaved itself, but John Tory and public health did not. They violated your rights and even went beyond their public health emergency measures and stuff like that. And as well, in Ottawa on February 14th, when they did a protest on Parliament Hill, the Freedom Movement, I called Ottawa Police and asked what would happen if I protested on the street in front of Parliament Hill. And she said, she said I had to get a permit from the city. And I said, well, what if I don't get a permit? And she said, well, just a minute. And she comes back and she says, well, as long as you don't go on the road and as long as you're peaceful, we're not going to bother you. And we're not even going to reduce your numbers. And I'm like, oh, okay. So this was done at the exact same time that these psyops were going on in Toronto on the weekend, when they were like viciously arresting people and so on. Ottawa's going, oh, we don't have a problem with that. So, and I believe the Toronto police don't either. I think it's just this psyop thing going on. So, my message to you is work on your faith and share with other people. That helps to build your faith, and do whatever you can. Like if we all, start biting their ankles, making little scratches and dents, we're going to get there, because there's way more of us than there are of them. Think of when you go camping and you put your tent on top of an anthill. First time that ever happened to me, I thought, oh, get off, you little buggers. And I started smacking them, thinking, that I could maintain my decision to camp exactly there. And then, of course, I ended up giving up and moving my tent somewhere else. And the next time that happened to me, I didn't even bother swatting them. I just thought, oh, okay, move my tent. So that's the same thing. We've got the numbers. We got to get organized. We got to get focused and organized. And we have to know that we have rights. We have inherent rights. Nobody gave us those rights. We have them. So there's no time that we should be saying, oh, well, we're screwed. We don't have any rights. We have rights at all times. But at this time, we have these inherent rights, and we have this legal expression of those rights and guarantee of those rights and commitment by the government and on the government to respect them at all times. So please familiarize yourself, read them. They're beautiful. It starts off in the Canadian Bill of Rights, the Parliament of Canada affirming that the Canadian nation is founded upon principles that acknowledge the supremacy of God, the dignity and worth of human person, and the position of family in a society of free men and free institutions. affirming also that men and institutions remain free only when freedom is founded upon respect for moral and spiritual values and the rule of law, and being desirous of enshrining these principles and the human rights and fundamental freedoms derived from them in a Bill of Rights, which shall reflect the respect of the Parliament for its constitutional authority and which shall ensure the protection of these rights and freedoms in Canada. So it's pretty strong. And Section 2 says they will not be, here I'll actually read it, every law of Canada shall, unless it's expressly declared by an act of Parliament of Canada that it shall operate notwithstanding the Canadian Bill of Rights, be so construed and applied as not to abrogate, abridge, or infringe, or to authorize the abrogation, abridgment, or infringement of any of the rights or freedoms herein recognized and declared. And they have, your fundamental rights: life, liberty, and security of person, freedom of religion, expression, assembly, press, all that stuff, as well as the basic or the full scope of legal rights. The right not to be arbitrarily detained, search and seizure, arbitrary search and seizure, stuff like that. So these really do protect you from the COVID measures. And in Alberta, if you're watching this from Alberta, or anywhere else really, it's very exciting to know that Alberta has put in a provincial Bill of Rights, which is in concert with this. It's almost the same wording, but it commits the Alberta government to the same rights. And they even have an extension, one interesting extension, where the parents have a right to control their child's education, which, like, it's not even in the federal one. It's important that they have that, because the two of them together, they can completely put aside these provincial emergency measures. Like in Ontario, we don't have this Ontario Bill of Rights. We just have the Canadian Bill of Rights. So we can stop police and bylaw from being used against us. And then we have to just get tickets, right? And then we can fight the tickets in court. And that doesn't close your business down if you get a ticket. And the tickets, I don't believe, are going to be held up anyways in court. Right now they're being thrown out. So I think we're good to go just with the Bill of Rights. But it's going to be interesting to see Alberta, where they go, because they have a much more comprehensive set of legislation that they can put forward. So that's it for the day, and my message is faith. Fight fear with faith.